All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking the upcoming 2026/2027 budget for the Village of the Hills. And a huge shout out to the Hills Observer for bringing this City Council workshop out into the open for the public. If you've ever been curious about how the gears of local municipal finance actually turn, you know where the money really goes, this explainer is going to lay it all out for you.
Now, the bottom line for this coming year is pretty incredible. The village is proposing absolutely zero tax dollar increases for residents. None. But here's the kicker. At the exact same time, they're projecting a massive $250,000 surplus. Honestly, it's a super rare and fantastic position for any city to find itself in. So we're going to uncover exactly how they pulled this off, and maybe even more importantly, look at the ongoing tug of war over how to actually spend that cash.
To make sense of this dense financial workshop, here is our agenda. We'll start with the big picture, followed by following the revenue, funding public safety, parks and community events, planning for the future, and finally, next steps for residents.
Starting off with Section 1, the big picture, tax rates and surpluses. The big takeaway here is that property values in the village barely budged. They only went up by about $1 million total across the entire community, which is actually pretty wild compared to the spikes we've seen in recent years. Because of this plateau, the city has successfully maxed out all allowable exemptions for residents, things like the over 65 and veteran homestead exemptions. So the proposed tax rate of 0.09181, it generates the exact same revenue as last year. As the council pointed out, this sends a very clear, powerful message. Absolutely no increase in your tax dollars, just collected at a slightly lower rate based on those new property valuations.
Moving right along to Section 2, following the revenue, where the money comes from. So if property taxes are flat, where is the money coming from? Well, check out those bottom two rows. Franchise fees actually saw this really weird, unexpected bump. Basically, AT&T and DirecTV split up organizationally, which ended up creating two entirely separate revenue streams for the village. That little corporate shuffle jumped their intake from around $1,700 to over $7,000. Pretty cool, right? But the real hero here, the thing truly floating the boat this year, is the booming sales tax collections. And you might be asking, where exactly is all that sales tax coming from? Well, it's the golf course. The new golf club owners instituted some pretty hefty rate increases on cart and green fees. We're talking anywhere from 7 to 16%. Now, because the village collects sales tax on those specific transactions, the city's sales tax receipts were already 11% over budget by July alone. It is a fascinating ripple effect. Private business pricing is quite literally padding the municipal treasury. Okay, so with the money coming in clearly mapped out and showing that incredibly healthy surplus we talked about, it really begs the ultimate question. How is the village actually spending all this cash? Let's flip the ledger and look at the expenses.
Which brings us to Section 3, funding public safety, protecting the village.
Naturally, we're starting with the biggest priority for any municipality, public safety. The law enforcement budget is bumping up by about $10,000 to roughly $240,000. In practical terms, that essentially buys the village 1.5 officers. You get one full-time officer on a grandfathered base contract and another half-officer equivalent working on an overtime rate. But here is the absolute best value add for the village. If, heaven forbid, there is a major criminal investigation, the Travis County sheriffs or local constables step right in with all their resources. Detectives, investigators, the whole shebang. And the village isn't charged a single extra dime because it's already covered by your county taxes. On the flip side of that, administrative and legal costs are taking a massive leap. Just look at this reality check. Last year, the legal budget sat pretty comfortably right around $45,000. Next year, they are proposing between $80,000 and $100,000. Why the huge jump? Well, it is almost entirely driven by those massive upcoming infrastructure projects, specifically the heavily debated Loman's Crossing intersection. Securing specialized consulting and engineering services, plus navigating the legal framework for a project of that sheer magnitude, well, it requires a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of billable hours. Okay, Section 4, Parks and Community Events, Quality of Life in the Hills. Let's pivot to the stuff residents actually see and enjoy every single day. And I have to say, government meetings can be incredibly dry, right? But they definitely have their moments. While they were discussing the wildlife management budget, which normally is just used for professional animal removal, one council member shared a genuinely hilarious anecdote. They asked who paid for the removal of a dead deer near their property a few years back. The answer? The vultures. Yep, Mother Nature occasionally steps in and handles municipal services completely free of charge. Jokes aside, though, the council is seriously debating dedicating $40,000 to some much-needed park improvements. Right now, current equipment, like the climbing wall, has kind of fallen into disrepair, so it needs immediate safety fixes. They're also looking at pavilion repairs, upgrading the irrigation, and even adding some high-grade big-ass fans to help battle that brutal Texas heat. One council member even brought up some really fascinating research from NYU professor Jonathan Haidt. The research suggests that modern, overly safe playgrounds might actually be detrimental to childhood development. So this member was really advocating for building a space that actually inspires kids to take a few risks and explore.
And speaking of irrigation, here is a super practical, albeit slightly surprising, safety fact that actually came out of this workshop. Listen up if you have kids. While they can totally safely play in the sprinklers over at the main park, they absolutely, under no circumstances, should play in the sprinklers on the golf course or the club estate's greenbelts. Why? Because those areas use reclaimed effluent water, which is subject to some incredibly strict health regulations. Definitely an important little distinction for local parents to keep in mind.
When it comes to community events, the council is definitely leaning into a do more with less approach. They're keeping a pretty tight $45,000 budget for all the flagship gatherings. The main goal here is to focus on guaranteed wins, like the huge Hill City Limits event in October, which, by the way, usually eats up about $30,000 on its own. So they are really pushing the Parks Commission to go out and secure outside sponsorships if they want to expand the calendar to include smaller events like movie nights or the annual Santa Party. That takes us to Section 5, Planning for the Future, allocating the $250K surplus. This is where the whole picture really ties together. How exactly is the council planning to handle that sweet $250,000 surplus we talked about at the start? Well, the short answer is with extreme caution. They are super hesitant to just blow the whole surplus on immediate park upgrades because there is this massive unknown hanging right over their heads, the Loman's Crossing Intersection project. The engineering, surveying, and consulting fees for an infrastructure overhaul of this scale are looming large, and the council wants to be absolutely sure the city's reserves are robust enough to absorb those massive hits once the final plans get greenlit. In fact, this exact issue led to one of the most intense debates of the entire workshop. It turned into this super deep accounting puzzle. The council literally had to debate whether paying to study the road alternatives for Loman's Crossing counted as a standard operating expense, or if they could classify it as a capital asset improvement, which completely changes the way it's legally funded. You guys, they were literally texting their accounting firm mid-meeting trying to get an official ruling. Ultimately, because the city doesn't actually own the road itself, even though the public gets a massive safety benefit from it, it falls into this weird gray area of municipal accounting. So for now, they're keeping those professional service budgets high just in case. Finally, Section 6, Next Steps for Residents Getting Involved.
So, what does this all mean for you? Well, the most crucial takeaway is that this budget is not set in stone yet. You, the residents, still have a direct say in what happens next. If you want your voice heard regarding where that $250,000 surplus actually goes, get your calendars out right now. There is a public hearing for both the budget and the tax rate scheduled for September 8th at 9 a.m. right during the regular council meeting. After that, they'll hold a special meeting on either September 21st or 22nd to officially adopt the final budget and tax rate ordinances.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty exciting thought to ponder today. If your local government suddenly found $250,000 just sitting in the ledger, how would you demand they spend it? Would you push for infrastructure, better parks, lowering taxes even further, or maybe just saving it for a rainy day? Getting a grip on these local workshops is really the first step to making sure your voice actually counts in your community. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.